Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Mina Hassanali, and I'm the Agriculture and Agri-Food Business Specialist in the Economic Strategy team here at York Region. On behalf of the Regional Municipality of York and our partners OMAFRA, as well as Durham Region, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this webinar. Today's module is the first of four and is part of the Vertical Farming 101 webinar series, as you can see the agenda. We heard from so many stakeholders directly that they wanted to learn more about this emerging field and how they can start their own vertical farm. And so we partnered with OMAFRA and Durham Region to really plan and deliver this very timely series. So there's a lot of interest. Today, I'm joined here by my colleagues from Durham Region and OMAFRA, and I'd like to introduce my colleague Stacy Jibb, who's the Manager of Agriculture and Rural Economic Development at Durham Region. Stacy?
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Mina. Really excited for today's workshop. We've had more than 300 people register from across Ontario and Canada, which really speaks to how much interest there is in this topic. So the purpose of the webinar series is really to provide aspiring and new vertical farmers with industry best practices, practical how-to strategies about setting up their very own vertical farm. Please note this webinar is being recorded and a copy will be available to you for reference, as well as being posted on the York, Link, and Region of Durham YouTube channels. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's session, Carolyn Puterbrow. She will moderate the session and introduce the speakers for today. So Carolyn is the Agriculture and Rural Economic Development Advisor with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. So over to you, Carolyn.
Thanks so much, Stacey, and thank you as well, Mina. I'm going to begin today with a land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples on all the lands that we are on today. While we meet together today on a virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improve our own understanding of local Indigenous people and their cultures, such as the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation and the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of our past and to consider how we are and can each in our own way try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. You will see on the screen today our agenda. We have two of my OMAFRA colleagues, Fadi Alduad, and who will provide technical information on the controlled environment agriculture or vertical farming, and Michael McGuire, who will speak on aquaponics and hydroponics, and both are experts within their field. They'll also reference research and training available that's available within the sector. And we'll wrap up the session today with insights from Derek Stevenson, who is the chief farmer from Mighty Harvest Produce. We're going to start out with some Zoom poll questions. So Larry, if you can pull up those poll questions, I'll invite everyone to take an opportunity to answer the questions. You'll see that there's quite a few questions. You have to scroll down a little bit to see them all. So I'll give you a moment to do that, and I can go over some housekeeping for the day while you do that. It's really helpful. You'll see some polling questions at the end of the session as well. And this helps us evaluate a number of things, and we need that evaluation in order to continue to deliver training such as this. So just take a moment to fill out where you're joining us from, so what type of organization you're coming from, whether it's a business or an organization, if you're actually engaged in vertical farming or planning on starting, and whether that COVID-19 has impacted your business. So we just appreciate that some time. So for the logistics today, we're going to go through all three presentations, and then we have time at the end that will allow for questions. So we've got a significant amount of time for questions at the end. We want you to type those questions in the chat. So if you hear something during any of the presentations, feel free to type the questions. We'll gather them up and ask our expert presenters at the end of the presentation. We do have a lot of people signed in for this webinar and signed up for it. So I'm going to ask if you would mind keeping your cameras off unless you are speaking. That's going to help with bandwidth issues that could occur when you have this many people on one Zoom session, and to please mute unless you're speaking. So that'd be very helpful if you would be able to do that for everyone. And I also would like to encourage you to use the chat. Use the chat to introduce yourself, let people know where you're coming from. This is a great opportunity if you're operating a business or you're from a municipality and you have questions. If you have knowledge that you can contribute as part of this discussion to the chat, we're really happy for you to do that. So we'll just take an opportunity. I think that we've got quite a few of the poll questions have been answered. We'll give you one more opportunity to do that. If you're not familiar with the Zoom platform, there is a button at the bottom with the chat that you can click and it'll open it up for you so that you can do that. I would invite you at this time to type your name and where you're joining us from in the chat as a chance to get to know each other as well. So I'll ask you, Larry, to end the poll and we can share the results so that we can see where everybody is joining us from. You can click through to see the results. We've got a mix of participants, quite a few from government joining us, some new vertical farmers, some that are preparing as well. So quite a mix, some academic as well, students. The status, there's 21% are exploring new markets in Ontario and 19 looking to establish a vertical farm in Ontario. And if you're planning on starting a vertical farm, what is the timing to be market ready? And we have some within 6 months, 22%, 28% within 1 to 2 years, and then 50% at more than 2 years. And has COVID-19 impacted your ability to grow or start a vertical business? You're looking at about 21% that has said yes somewhat and 11% that said yes a lot. So thank you for sharing the information here. And I'd encourage you to send your comments to everyone in the session rather than to one as an individual. So at this time, I'll ask if our speakers would like to join us, and we'll get ready for our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Fadi Aldouad. He is our greenhouse vegetable specialist with OMAFRA. He has his portfolio includes vegetables and cannabis grown in controlled environments such as greenhouses, warehouses, and vertical farms. After earning his doctorate from the Department of Biology at McMaster University with a specialization in molecular plant pathology, Fadi worked with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and the Department of Plant Agriculture at the University of Guelph, Ontario. He's conducted both applied and fundamental research of horticultural and field crops, and has experience communicating his research to the scientific community and to producers. Today, he works in collaboration with producers, researchers, and industry partners to advance controlled environment agriculture Ontario, and he's done a wonderful job of networking and connecting with those working in the sector. So I'm so happy to have you as part of our presentation today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Carolyn, and thanks to all the organizers for inviting me to speak today. Let me know if you don't see my screen or if you can't hear me, but I'll just go ahead. So today I'll be talking to you about vertical farming in Ontario, and I'll provide you with an overview of the sector. I'll talk a little bit about the opportunities and challenges for vertical farmers. And I'll talk a little bit about the production system, some of the resources happening in the province, and some of the OMAFRA resources available to support the sector. So vertical farming is a form of controlled environment agriculture, or CEA. And unlike other forms of agriculture like field ag or greenhouse agriculture, really everything can be controlled within a vertical farm. So the temperature, the humidity, irrigation, and specifically lights. So because these are fully enclosed indoors, they don't use sunlight, but 100% artificial lighting, and that really distinguishes the vertical farm from other forms of ag. You probably heard other terms referring to vertical farms like plant factories, warehouse food production, urban agriculture is another term that includes them. So there's a lot of terms that refer to vertical farming, and that's the term that I use is the vertical farming term. So the actual structure of a vertical farm can change depending on the business model. The majority of the vertical farmers that I work with use warehouses to retrofit the warehouses to house their vertical farming operation. But I've also heard a lot from the traditional agricultural community, a lot of field farmers with empty barns, for example, and then they'd like to repurpose those kinds of empty buildings for vertical farming. And another business model is something like this, where you have the vertical farm in the back, and then a storefront in the front of the store. So you're producing food in the back, and then welcoming customers in the front. So it all depends on your business model. There's also container style vertical farms, like the picture down here. These are retrofitted shipping containers, and they're much easier to deal with in terms of shipping and constructing in more remote and northern regions of the province and the country in general. So as I mentioned, I work with a group of vertical farmers in Ontario, and they're spread all over the province. This just kind of shows you some of the cities that include some of those farms that I'm working with. This isn't a complete picture by any means, but just to give you an idea of what the distribution looks like. Most of them are in southern Ontario, stretching from southwestern Ontario near the Windsor area, all the way east to very close to Ottawa. But we also have a number of them in northern Ontario near Dryden and north of Sudbury. And of course, as I mentioned, there's a lot of communities up here, especially Indigenous communities, with some of these container style vertical farms that I don't have on this map right now. The location of the vertical farm really affects a number of different aspects of production. Mainly, you have to think about your inputs. So you'll be requiring electricity, water, natural gas. So depending on the infrastructure available in the area, that will really affect the ability for you to access those. Of course, vertical farms also have biowaste, so you need facilities to deal with that. Labor in vertical farms is very local. So a lot of vertical farmers will hire from within the communities they're in, not very much offshore labor. Very high skilled community as well. So that's another thing you have to think about when you think about location. And finally, the market. Usually vertical farmers are producing food locally, but they're also consuming food locally. So a lot of the product goes to local restaurants, grocery stores, local distribution channels. So all of these things are affected by the location of your vertical farm. A lot of the crops grown in vertical farms have very short production cycles, as you can imagine, limited areas, small crops. So the most common right now are leafy greens, herbs, and microgreens. Recently, Good Leaf and Guelph did announce their spinach, their commercial spinach line. One of the main priorities for vertical farmers is to increase their crop diversity, including fruiting crops. There's a lot of experimentation with strawberries and many vegetables that in the near future will hopefully come to commercial scale production. The way that you can grow all these crops depends on the production system that you have. The traditional one is like this one here, where you have stacked horizontal surfaces. But you can also grow them on these what they call grow towers on a vertical surface, where you're growing the plants on the side, and you have the light either on top or hanging on the side of the plants to provide them with light. The third system here, I don't see a lot in Ontario, but it's where you have a fixed light source, and then you're moving the plants around that light source to provide the plants with light and shade. Besides the towers or the shelves, you also have to think about the growing media, nutrient solution, and environment control. If you're looking at organic production, you have to grow in soil, but the majority of vertical farms that I deal with use soilless media, such as rock wool, coconut coir, or peat. Hydroponics is still the most common way of delivering the nutrient solution, nutrient film technique, for example. But aeroponics is also growing, where you're basically misting the roots of the plants with the nutrient solution. A lot of the vertical farms also choose to recycle their nutrient solution, reducing their water consumption and using sterilization filtration systems such as ultraviolet light to disinfect the system. Environment control is very important. You need to provide proper heating, humidity, air movement, and CO2 supplementation. Some growers use CO2 supplementation, although it's not that common. I'd like to focus a little bit more on lighting, because that's really where a lot of the research is happening in the sector. Both, I'll talk a little bit about light quantity as well as light quality. So you can see here from this table, it shows you the minimum daylight integral, so DLI, daily light integral, that is, and that's the total amount of light that the plant gets in a day. And you can see here the traditional, conventional vertical farm crops don't have a lot of light requirements, but as you go down the table to the more vine crops like tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers, you have a higher requirement for light, and that's where that barrier is for adoption into vertical farming. The more light you use, the higher the production cost is. And this just kind of shows you the effect of light quantity on a plant. This is a head of lettuce grown under optimal light conditions, and as you increase light, you see a deterioration in the quality of the plant. So this just kind of gives you an idea of how the light quantity really affects the plant. Both too much light as well as too little light can do damage. I'd like to talk a little bit about light quality, because it's a very important aspect of vertical farming. Plants utilize the blue range of light and the red range of light. This is the photosynthetically active radiation, or PAR. So this is the visual light spectrum. So plants utilize the blue and red light the most efficiently for photosynthesis, although there's more research that's shown other light colors being important for photosynthesis as well. So the light quality can be is really reliant on the type of light that you're using. So the most common light right now in vertical farms are these LEDs, the light emitting diodes. They're much more efficient than the other lights. They produce less heat, which means you can stack the light and the plant very close together without harming the plant. And importantly, you can adjust the spectrum. So you can see here, again, here's the PAR range on the bottom, and you can buy LEDs at red, green, yellow, or yellow or red, depending on your light recipe. For fluorescent and high pressure sodium lights, the more traditional lights, they're very fixed. So you can see here HPS is much more enriched in the yellow range, whereas the white LEDs, if you buy white LEDs, you can get much more broad range of light. What I've seen more and more now is the adoption of hybrid lighting, where you have a white light or HPS light, as well as some blue and red LEDs to really enrich those particular light colors. This table here is very busy, but I'm not going to go through it, but I just wanted to keep it in the presentation so people can look at it after. It just kind of describes the effect of light color on plant development. This graph here kind of shows that figure in much more visual way, where we have different light recipes that use red and blue light, red, blue, green, and far red light, and different combinations of those 4 different lights. It shows you how just changing the light can really change a crop. But this is a lettuce crop and a kale crop grown under these different light recipes. And you can see not only do you change the architecture, so compact versus a stretched out plant, you're also changing the taste and the color, which is very important to pay attention to. So you can do a lot by changing the light spectrum. So in general, when growing a lettuce and microgreens, you want to keep these parameters in mind. The temperature for day and night needs to be optimized. The relative humidity in the vertical farm needs to be at optimal level, as well as CO2 parts per million. And again, the daily light interval is very important for production. So all of these different parameters are controlled by very sophisticated sensors, temperature sensors, humidity sensors, light sensors, and all these sensors feed the information into a central computer system that you can use to control the vertical farm. The trend now is going towards more autonomous growing, where in the near future, we will see autonomous or artificial intelligence and machine learning controlling these vertical farms with very little input from the grower, which frees up the grower to do other things, as well as reducing reliance on labor. I want to talk a little bit about IPM, integrated pest management. We have a specialist dedicated for IPM. Karen McCreary is the OMAFRA Greenhouse Vegetable Integrated Pest Management Specialist. She's on parental leave right now, so we have Andrew Wiley, her backfill until Kara comes back in April. But I did want to mention a few things about IPM in vertical farms. All of the vertical farms that I work with do not use pesticides at all. They like to market their product, as you can see here on this Good Leaf package, as pesticide free, which is much better than even organic production, because organic production uses organic pesticides, and these vertical farms don't use any. However, this does lead to some pest issues that we've been observing. So we're working very closely with the vertical farming sector to register biopesticides potentially for their use in the near future, if that's something they wish on using. So some of the research in the province that really supports the sector has come from the SPACE program, where a lot of these research into growing food in space and enclosed areas has given rise to a lot of the technologies that we're using in vertical farming. LEDs, for example, came from the SPACE program. So some of the priorities right now in research include, again, a lot of research on the use of lighting. Environmental control is very important. Exactly how to optimize the microclimate in vertical farm is something still needs to be studied. And the crop diversification, so screening and breeding for more crops that can be grown in these systems is on their priority list. Some of the research facilities that I work with include the University of Guelph. The Controlled Environment Systems Research Facility at the University of Guelph has an advanced life support agricultural program, high-tech growth chambers, and we're working very closely with the university as well as other industry and greenhouse and vertical farmers to support their research needs. I am based out of the Harrow Research and Development Center. It's an AFC research station, and they've recently acquired a vertical farm like this one pictured here, and they're involved in research as well as they help communities, especially in northern and remote regions, construct these container style vertical farms for local food production. Unfortunately, the education and training piece for vertical farming is lacking because it's such a new system. However, the University of Guelph has an excellent program at their School of Environmental Sciences. Greenhouse Canada magazine has some great articles specifically about vertical farming. I'm part of the organizing committee for the Canadian Greenhouse Conference, so the CGC has dedicated sessions for vertical farms as well. So what we're trying to do is really incorporate more materials specific for vertical farming into everything that OMAFRA is doing. And I kind of list some of the stuff here that I'm personally doing. I'm meeting with a group of vertical farmers on a quarterly basis. So if you're a vertical farmer or you know one who'd like to join the group just to have a chat and work on some projects together, I'm more than welcome. I'm more than open to introducing myself to those folks. I'm also working with that group to submit research proposals for funding. As I mentioned, registering biopesticides, and we're including a lot of these materials specific for vertical farms into a lot of our KTT, or knowledge transfer and translation activity, like our greenhouse vegetable course, publications, and webinars that we're holding on a regular basis. So just to summarize my presentation, this is kind of a list of the benefits that I talked about for vertical farming, the local aspect, the locally produced food, locally consumed food, the local workforce, the smaller land footprints, especially using brownfield sites where you can use and repurpose empty buildings, and of course this much more controlled growing environment. Some of the challenges overall is the limited crop selection. Very high technical expertise is needed to run a vertical farm. So that's an issue just with training, labor. Electricity costs obviously is a barrier because of all the needs required there, as well as the legacy of that it's a niche type of production system, but now we're hoping to break away from that stereotype just because of the increase in crop diversity. So I'd like to finish by providing you with my contact info. Email is the best way to get a hold of me. And our blog has all of our articles and webinars and workshops, all the kind of training activity that we do to support the vertical farming sector. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and I provide all the information as well there. Thanks very much for listening.
I'm always amazed every time I hear you speak how much information you could fit into a very limited number of slides. But I feel like there's going to be a lot of questions for you after this presentation and ask you some more details.
Too much stuff in there. Thanks, Carol.
Yeah, thank you very much, Patty. Well, our next speaker is Michael McGuire. Michael is our aquaculture and aquaponics specialist with OMAFRA, and he spent his career working in aquaculture and aquaponics across much of Canada in both the private, public, and educational sectors. And Michael's going to share some specifics on the technical aspects from an aquaponics perspective. So just a little piece of his portfolio today, but we appreciate him joining us.
Thanks, Carolyn. I'll just share my screen now.
Perfect. And a number of people are asking in the chat about how this information will be shared. So there are going to be, there will be a YouTube, it posted on YouTube, the recording. Both the Durham region and York Link have YouTube channels. Well, this information will be posted. So that'll be sent out after the presentation to all the registrars. Okay, I will shut off my screen and let you go ahead, Mike.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. As Carolyn mentioned, my name is Michael McGuire. I work for OMAFRA as the aquaculture and aquaponics specialist. So part of my job is working with aquaponic producers. And I'm here to talk about aquaponics today. If you'd like to reach out to me after the presentation, I'll leave my email address. Please feel free to do so. And I will begin by just giving a brief presentation overview. I'm going to be talking about what, why, and how of aquaponics. I'm going to look at three main production systems within aquaponics and some of the products that are produced in aquaponics, and then some information on how to get started in aquaponics in Ontario. So I would say that aquaponics can be used in a vertical farming capacity, but it's not exclusive to vertical farming. There are producers in further south regions that grow outdoors, either under glass or in a fully outdoor setting. But of course, aquaponics, which is really just a form of hydroponic production, can be used in a vertical farm capacity for sure. So really what aquaponics is, it's a combination of two growing systems, one being RAS aquaculture, so recirculating aquaculture systems, and then the other being hydroponic production. So we've merged these two production systems into one sort of harmonious production system. And in an essence, when you really boil it down, what happens is that fish provide nutrients for plants, and plants filter water returning to the fish. So it's a real harmonious relationship. There's a third component to this relationship, which is the microorganisms within the system, but I'll get into that in a second. So I mean, it's really important to answer the question, why would we do aquaponics? Because there are many ways to grow produce. And these are some of the key why aspects to aquaponics. So we can produce two revenue streams from one input, and that one input being fish feed. We do know that when you're using aquaponics, you're reducing your water demand because you're recycling so much of the water. So compared to conventional irrigated agriculture, far lower water demand, far lower discharge, which means a lower impact on the environment, but it also allows you to locate in sort of neat areas that are closer to market. It is what we would call a natural or organic food production system, because you can't use synthetic chemical pesticides or herbicides. Basically, they will kill your fish. So that excludes any of these pesticides or herbicides. So it's a real natural form of production. You can locate, as I'd mentioned, in non-traditional spaces, whether they be urban spaces or far remote areas of Ontario. But really what aquaculture or aquaponics boils down to, and why we do it, is the symbiotic relationship between plants fish and microorganisms. And that's really what we're capturing within aquaponics, and that's why we do aquaponics. So look at this relationship just sort of from a high level perspective. We feed our fish. Fish metabolize food. They also excrete ammonia, carbon dioxide, and organic wastes through their gills, through their feces, and through their urine. So this is where the organic matter comes from the fish, but it's really the microorganisms that break down this organic source and make it into a plant available nutrients. So what the microorganisms do, it's sort of twofold, is that nitrifying bacteria convert highly toxic ammonia to nitrite and then to nitrate, which is less toxic to fish. And then other microorganisms convert the organic waste, otherwise known as mineralization, converting it into available plant nutrients, primarily nitrate or nitrogen compounds that the plants are then able to take up as their energy source. And then that just filters the water that returns to the fish, because eventually your nitrate levels will reach a point where they're toxic to your fish. So nitrate is a less toxic form of ammonia, but eventually within an RAS system or within an aquaponic system, if the plants aren't extracting it, it will eventually be a problem. Now, I'll briefly touch on aquaponic system designs. I would say that aquaponic systems are highly variable. So I'm just trying to provide the basic outline of what most aquaponic systems, how they look, their system design. So typically, the start of your production or your cycle will be in your sump at your low point. Here you need electricity to pump your water up to your high point, which is your tank, where your rearing tank, where you're rearing fish or other aquatic organisms. You could be growing shrimp, so it doesn't have to be fish, but this is generally located at the high point within the system. Then for your fish tank, the water will flow by gravity into your solids filtration unit. There are different methods to remove solids, and they kind of depend on your needs. If you want to keep things simple, clarifiers are a great way to remove solids because they don't require energy inputs, they don't require water, and they don't require backwashing or maintenance, that sort of maintenance. But if you do require mechanical separation, you have a high organic load, maybe you're using NFT, nutrient film technique, you may want to look to mechanical separation in the forms of bead filters, drum filters, sand filters, this sort of things. From solids filtration, the water flows by gravity again into your biofilter. Sometimes your biofilter and your hydroponic media are one and the same, but sometimes you need a separate biofilter to convert your ammonia into nitrate. So that the biofilter is what houses all your nitrifying bacteria. It holds your plastic media, which are just basically surface area for your nitrifying bacteria to colonize. Your biofilter are often in the form of moving bed biofilters, which require aeration. Because it's an oxidative process, so it's an aerobic process, the nitrification process. Water would then typically be pumped into your hydroponic growing medium. I will talk about 3 or 4 different systems within hydroponics that are used in aquaponics. And then from your hydroponic system, it flows by gravity back into the sump, and then it's pumped back up to your fish tank. So that's, in a nutshell, the hydroponic or aquaponic cycle. Now, if we look at production systems, I'd mentioned there's various hydroponic systems within aquaponics, but within aquaponics itself, it also has 2 forms of systems. One is a coupled system. You can think of that as a single loop. And then the other is a decoupled system that you can think of it as a multi-loop or dual loop system. Then typically what's used in aquaponics is nutrient film technique, deep water culture, or media bed technique. Those are kind of the most prevalent techniques. And then we've also seen the emergence of the dual root zone technique, which is kind of a hybrid soil and soil-less technique. If we look closely at coupled aquaponic systems, I've just tried to provide the flow dynamics for you. So we know that from our sump tank at the lowest point in our system, water is pumped up by pressure, by force, up to your rearing tank. Your rearing tank removes the solids, biofiltration, hydroponics, and then back to your sump. So it's I guess you could say it's less complex than a decoupled system, but there are some real advantages to a coupled system. One is that it has a smaller footprint. It's generally less expensive and less technically complex to start up. But the real disadvantage from coupled systems is that the plants and the fish always have, one of the two always has to compromise. It's very rare that within a coupled system, you have ideal conditions for fish and ideal conditions for your plants. So generally within a coupled system, you have to decide who you want to have the optimal conditions, if you want to direct your optimal conditions to your plant production, because that produces most of your revenue. Then often your fish are going to be growing at, say, a temperature that is less than ideal for their production. And that's just sort of the drawback of coupled aquaponic systems. You can, and it is very important to match your fish species to your plant production so that they align within primarily within temperature ranges. If we look at decoupled systems, these systems form two separate loops. So you can see there's a fish loop and then there's a plant loop. So within the fish loop, water circulates between the biofilter down to the degasser, because now you've got to strip off carbon dioxide, to the fish sump, and then back up to the rearing tank. So that's the fish loop. And then the plant loop is simply a loop between the plant sump tank and the hydroponic growing medium. These two systems are then connected via a biodigester, which takes the solid waste from the fish production or from the fish cycle. Under aerobic conditions, it digests the nutrients within that's been removed from the solid filter after a process of time, about 30 days. The source nutrients from the biodigester are then added directly to the plant sump tank. So that's how they're connected is through this biodigester. And then the real disadvantages of this system are that they have a larger footprint, greater infrastructure, and more capital intensive. But the advantages are that you can manipulate your fish temperature for optimal fish growing conditions. You can manipulate your plants for optimal temperature, for optimal nutrients, pH, and all these variables. So you can think of them as two separate systems that you can optimize for production. So I'll now highlight the three predominant systems within aquaponics. First being nutrient film technique, which is probably the most suitable for vertical farming capacities. Here, plants are supported in narrow troughs. And what happens here is a thin layer of water is sub-irrigated along the bottom of these troughs. The roots suspend in both air and water, which provides for both the uptake of nutrients and the uptake of oxygen. They're really best suited for short stature plants. And as I mentioned, the advantages are they're lightweight, so they're easy for the operator to use, maintenance, cleaning, this sort of things, but you're also able to stack them in an indoor vertical capacity. And then they require a smaller sump tank and less water. But the real disadvantages for nutrient film are they require solids filtration, because you're administering water through this very small water line that is prone to clogging. And so it's very important you remove your solids wastes. And then also that the biofilter, you require a separate biofilter, because there is no media like in a media bed situation that can house microbes that will then perform your nitrification within your hydroponic substrate. So it requires separate filtration, separate aeration. There's also not a lot of thermal mass at work. So if there's a flow interruption, your plants die very quickly, and this sort of thing. So also, environment control is key, because you don't want environmental temperature swings, because there is this lack of water to moderate the effects of changing temperatures. Deep water culture is another very prevalent technique within aquaponics. It uses these polystyrene rafts that support plants, and the plants grow down into the nutrient rich water, which is your aquaponic system water. It's very well suited for short stature plants, roots that tolerate wet conditions, things like leafy greens, herbs, and watercress. The advantages are ease of maintenance and cleaning. Also, there is a bit lower risk in terms of power failures and water cycling, because your roots are continuously submerged in water. Pump disruptions aren't as impactful. And then there's this big thermal mass that kind of regulates temperature swings within the root zone. The disadvantages are there's no passive aeration, so you require energy inputs to either oxygenate or aerate your troughs. The amount of water results in heavy hydroponic infrastructure, and then you can have solids settling in certain pockets of your trough, which produces anaerobic conditions and can kill your plants. If we looked at media bed technique, probably the technique that's least suitable for vertical farming and probably the least used technique. Perhaps it's not used at all. So media bed technique really uses inert media, which serves as a root support and home for your microbial substrate. Water is supplied in a flood and drain or an ebb and flow pattern. The real advantages of media bed technique is that they support large stature, nutrient-loving plants such as tomatoes and cucumbers. You can also have nitrification and mineralization within the beds, which is an advantage. And you have efficient aeration of the root zone, because aeration happens passively as the water level drops. It sucks or draws down oxygen into the root zone. So you don't have to have that energy input. The disadvantages really come in the maintenance, increased labor cost, heavy infrastructure, the forming of anaerobic conditions within the media bed, and it is difficult to scale or to scale up. I briefly touch on the dual root zone system. It's a system that's kind of been made popular by cannabis producers. And what it does is it incorporates soil and soilless techniques. So it uses a container that holds soil, which is divided by a burlap sack, divides the hydroponic media from the soil media or the soil. And essentially what happens is the plant roots grow through the soil, through the burlap sack, into the media, where they're then drawing on the hydroponic solution in the aquaponic system. And they're also drawing some nutrients from the soil itself. So they're exposed to terrestrial and aquatic microbes. And the advantages to this system, which can be used in deep water culture or media bed technique, are really that you can add nutrients, that if you see nutrient deficiencies, you can add them in your soil zone. And then of course the root stability comes into play, and it's really a low risk system. In the event of water blockages or water stoppages, your soil still retains some moisture. The disadvantages, of course, are the time and the cost of working with soil. You do require second irrigation, so you'll need to irrigate your soil periodically to make sure it's at least moist. And then you could potentially be introducing pests or disease when you're bringing in your soil. So if you're looking at getting started in aquaponics in Ontario, through the Ontario Aquaculture Research Centre, they offer a brief online training course, which is free. You can find that course at the link provided. If we're looking at what sort of species grow well in aquaponics, I wouldn't really say that aquaponics is overly restrictive of what species, whether they're fish or plants. There's a broad range there, but it is important to match your fish species with your plant species. So if you have a cold water species like rainbow trout, you would want to grow a more cold tolerant plant like leafy greens. Lettuce would be a prime example, or kale. So very important to match your fish with your plant species of production. Important to keep in mind that the species that you grow of fish must be on the eligible species list that's provided by the Ministry of Northern Development, Mines and Natural Resources. There are only 47 species that are eligible for culture within Ontario. They all require an aquaculture license. If you are culturing an ornamental fish, that includes koi, you do not require an aquaculture license. All other species, all other non-ornamental species require an aquaculture license. If you're looking for some academic resources and some prominent aquaponics researchers, I've found Dr. Nick Savidov, Dr. James Ricosi, Michael Timmons, and Simon Godek, all very good aquaponic researchers that have provided a lot of great information. Feel free to look them up on the net. There's a lot of great information out there. Some more online resources are the NOA Fisheries online aquaponics course, which is provided by NOA Fisheries, which can be found at the link below. Also, I've found some great information by a guy named Dr. Nate Story, great YouTube videos online. And then if your focus is on aquaponic cannabis, I've found some real useful information with the Potentponics or the Growing with Fishes podcast. I've provided additional resources for aquaculture licensing, permits to take water, compliance approvals, and fish processing requirements. And so I guess we'll wait until the end for questions, but that wraps up my presentation. So hopefully it's been somewhat enjoyable, and hopefully I haven't gone too far over time.
No, not at all. That was great. So much information again. And just the resources, the links to further resources are really helpful, I think, as people start exploring this journey. So there are lots of questions. We'll dive into those. We'll let Derek do his tour first, and then we'll pull everybody back up for questions. So our final speaker today before our questions is Derek Stevenson. Derek is the chief farmer for Mighty Harvest Produce. Mighty Harvest was formed just in 2021, so this past year, and it's a vertical farm located in Oshawa, Ontario. And the inspiration for this farm came from Derek's plant-based diet journey and the passions for entrepreneurship and sustainability. Mighty Harvest currently supplies local restaurants and also sells directly to consumers. So we'll pull Derek up and spotlight him. And Derek, we look forward to hearing from you, somebody who's in the business of vertical farming. So I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. My screen's working okay?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. So yeah, as the introduction stated, my name is Derek Stevenson, founder of Mighty Harvest. So for this presentation, I'll walk you quickly through the farm, through the slideshow. I have some pictures so you can just understand the setup a little bit better. We'll talk about the business planning, customer discovery, crop development, and the logistics of getting your product out to market. So in our farm, as Fadi talked about, there's we have our environmental controller, which you can see on the right-hand side there. So that's controlling everything from humidity, temperature, to nutrients in the water that's feeding the plants. In the middle picture there, we have our germination chamber. So all of our crops go into Once they're seeded, they go into that germination chamber for anywhere between 1 and let's say 5 days, depending on the crop. And that's just going to bring a high percentage of humidity to the seeds to crack the seed open. And then on the left-hand side there, that's just an extension of the environmental controller, which is, that's connected to some sensors in our tank that's measuring the nutrients, the temperature, and the pH level of our water, and ensuring that the proper level of nutrients are feeding the plants. Here we have our seedling area. So after that germination chamber of the 1 to 5 days, our seedlings are going to come over to here. Usually between 1 and 3 weeks, depending on the crop. And the purpose of this area is just to develop the seeds in as high density way as possible, just to reduce the amount of space needed to develop the crops as we would be using in our main setup. So the tower system was mentioned by Fadi. And it's the system that we went just, we evaluated different systems, including NFT and deep water culture, and the tower system worked well for us. So after the seedlings come out of the seedling area of 1 to 3 weeks, they come in these towers, they're transplanted in here, and they could spend anywhere from 2 weeks to a couple months in here, depending on the crop. So planning the business. Aside from the standard entrepreneurship and business planning steps that you would take to start the business, obviously you have to factor in the equipment. With vertical farming, you need to be able to maximize your yield per square foot. And so to do that, you need to understand the equipment fully. You need to understand how much you're going to be able to yield per week, per month, and per year out of your equipment. And before you even start that, you really do want to know what kind of crops you want to grow, who your market is. You could have a farm that's totally devoted to herbs. You could have a farm that's totally devoted to lettuce. So you want to know where your market is with some proximity. I mean, you don't have to be like totally specific of I want to grow this amount of basil plants and this amount of lettuce plants per year, but have some general idea. Your equipment, you also need to evaluate how labor intensive your equipment is. I would say our equipment is fairly low labor on the harvesting side, but a little bit higher labor on the cleaning side than some other, let's say an NFT system, where you might have higher labor because in a vertical setting, you need to, let's say, get up 14 feet in the air if your system's not totally automated to bring the crops down to you. So you're going up on a scissor lift and you're spending more time harvesting that way, versus our towers and our racks move very modularly, so we can bring the crops to us. But there is quite a bit of media involved and whatnot in our system, which requires more cleaning. So you have to balance that out and figure out what kind of system works best for you and again for your crops. When you're selecting a location, so we're here in Oshawa, Ontario, you need to look at, speak with your municipality that you want to locate in. And you might be, with real estate the way it is in Ontario, especially, spaces aren't necessarily that easy to find. So we had to be fairly open to what location and what municipality we were going to be located in. But talk with different economic development representatives, zoning personnel, and even as Stacy on this call is as an agriculture representative for the region, speak with these people as much as you can when you're planning your business. They're going to help guide you into what kind of spaces you should be looking at, the benefits and disadvantages of each municipality, and et cetera, and help you get there. So for customer discovery and acquisition, so our farm, we're a little bit different in that we cater to a few different types of customers versus some of the larger farms that are, like Goodleaf, for example, which Fadi had some examples of. They're fairly, not 100%, but mostly a wholesale to grocery store business. We kind of specialize in restaurants. We do direct to consumer as well, and we do have some small scale grocery stores that we sell to. But each of those sales avenues has their pros and cons. Grocery stores, they're very consistent. Their order week to week is going to be fairly similar, so they're reliable in that way. But they're going to be, price sensitive. You're going to spend time on the packaging side of things. Versus with restaurants, they're going to want stuff in larger bulk cases, so you're going to spend less time packaging. But restaurants can be very high labor or very needy as well, and not necessarily the most reliable. Obviously, during COVID, even less so, as they may have to shut down. You can go through distributors as well, like a Cisco or a GFS, and that's kind of going to be similar to the grocery model, whereas you're going to be able to have consistent and high volumes, but they're going to be very price sensitive as well, which is not the easiest thing in vertical farming, where you have high costs compared to traditional outdoor agriculture. And then there's the direct to consumer market, which is I personally wanted to do the direct to consumer just because I enjoy that side of the business and speaking with the customers and engaging with them and seeing how the product is helping them and their families. But it's a time consuming market as well. Whether you're doing deliveries or you have an in-store pickup system, it definitely takes more time than any of the wholesale routes. You could get top dollar for your product, but everything has its pros and cons in that sense. And with the direct consumer market, we were able to develop that market through doing farmers markets in the summer. That was our best initiative. And then obviously online marketing through social media is definitely a way to get your business name out there as well. So when you're developing your crops, when you're planning your business, you may think that, again, that this is kind of the crop ratios that I want, and these are the crops that I want. Most likely it's going to change as you get more experience in growing and you understand what grows well, what customers want, what customers don't want. So be flexible in terms of that. Be willing to change and willing to try out new crops. A restaurant or a grocery store may ask you for a specific item that you don't grow, and depending on the scale that you're at, you may be able to actually try out those products and get something that they want, and that's building a great relationship with your customer. You may need to also manage your customer expectations. I mean, in a vertical farm, especially starting up, you may have some wobbles in terms of growing, and 1 week your crop may be a bit less than the previous week. So as you develop and get better as a grower, you're going to have a more consistent schedule and know exactly how much you're going to get each week. But during those first few months that you're starting up, you may have to sometimes tell a customer that you're unable to provide their order. But the best way to manage this is just communicating with the customer and bring them to the farm, show them the farm, give them the experience, explain to them how the system works and that you are learning and that you can build that relationship with them and have them on board, and they will appreciate you more and build that trust with them. Yeah, so that's pretty much for that slide there. And then logistics. So logistics is a really big part of the vertical planning of vertical farming. And I would say part of that is you need to collect a lot of data on your yields, on your crops, and you need to know, if I plant this amount of seed on this day and what day is that going to be harvested and how much am I going to get out of it? And this is, as I previously spoke about, during the learning process and getting started, when you don't have all of this data and you're still figuring things out a little bit, this is why you're going to have some inconsistencies. But once you can build this data set, you can be really reliable in terms of what yields you're getting, because the big advantage of vertical farming is that you are a controlled environment and you're not susceptible to weather. So the consistency will come for sure. And with that, you need to use that data to build a schedule, which depending on the person, can be a fun thing or a not very fun thing, because you know, you need to allocate your farm most productively and make sure that you're yielding the most amount of crop while also growing, you know, the right amount of crop for each customer, and making sure that you can actually sell it all. So you want to have a, you know, spend a lot of time on that in your schedule system, and make sure that you have a robust schedule that's going to continually produce something that you can reliably get out to your customers. In terms of packaging, it's definitely, you know, as a smaller scale vertical farm, as opposed to, again, someone like a Goodleaf, you're going to most likely not have a packaging line, which means that you know, most likely would be manually packaging products, which can be time consuming for sure, but it's all built into the cost. And, you know, vertical farmed products do have typically a higher, you know, price tag than your conventional products, sometimes even a little bit higher than organic. So it's all worth it in the end, definitely, to package the products and get it out that way. You want to definitely evaluate your packaging options. That's one of the most expensive inputs into selling a packaged product is the plastic itself. And I do say plastic in that sense. When I started this business, I was intent on not doing conventional plastic for sure. We evaluated some compostable, clear plastic-like products. And, you know, right now where it is, we are using plastic because it does hold the product a little bit longer, which is one of our main, you know, sales tactics, is that our product does last quite long. But, you know, that's, we are flexible on that and continue looking at different options. And if you can build a, you know, right from the start, if you can build a bring your own container system, if you want to do the direct to consumer model, or some sort of a reusable container system, that would be a very large selling point for the consumer. And you do want to, you know, focus on getting that product out the door as soon as possible. So, you know, once you harvest, if you can get it out that day or the next day, the customer, whether that be a grocery store or direct to consumer, is going to appreciate that much more, because it's going to last longer in their fridge, or in a grocery store sense, it's going to last longer on their shelves. And that, you know, less food waste via that system. Okay, so that wraps it up for now. You can contact me, info@mightyharvest.ca. And I do look forward to hearing your questions and answering those as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Derek. It's so much. I think you've likely had a pretty big learning curve in the last year, but you sound like you've really been able to have continuous improvement and move forward in your business in a really short period of time. It's exciting to hear you talk. Thank you so much. All right, so at this time, we're going to do a couple of things. We have another set of Zoom polls that we would like everyone to comment on, and then I'll ask each of our speakers to turn their cameras back on, and we'll take an opportunity to start going through the many questions that we've acquired during the presentation. So you'll see, if you just could take a moment to provide us some evaluation feedback on our speakers and the presentations, and whether to improve your understanding. And as many of you know, this is the first of 4 webinars that will be offered throughout the month of February, each exploring a different aspect of vertical farming. And always we've worked really hard, and we're so appreciative of our speakers for volunteering to participate in these sessions and to provide their expertise on the topics, and their contact information, and so many resources for you to be able to follow up on it and look into this in a deeper way. So I'm going to ask if each of our speakers want to turn their cameras on. We'll pull you up on the screen, and we'll start with the questions as this poll is just wrapping up. I'll just add the spotlight for everyone so everybody can see all of us. Okay, let's begin with our questions, and they were coming fast and furious. Some of them to everybody, and some of them just to me. So I'll try to go through and ask them all. The first one, I think, likely is for you, Fatty, is what does research show regarding the relative nutrient value among the various production styles? So, and it could be broader. So versus say greenhouse or vertical farming or raised beds, is there research in that area?
Yeah, that's one. I did see that question, and unfortunately, there isn't a lot of research that I'm aware of that actually compares the nutritional composition of those crops that are produced in different ways. That's something that I'm very interested in. So hopefully in the future, we'll have some of those projects. Now that we have a more established vertical farming sector, we can work with some of those producers, bring in the greenhouse sector, and I'll be working with my colleagues in the field horticulture sector to really compare and contrast those production systems, and not only in terms of the nutritional composition of the crops, but also really in general how much. What are the inputs? What do they look like for each production system? How do they compare in terms of the water, requirements, nutrient requirements, natural gas, electricity, all those things kind of combined. That's definitely something that I'd be very interested in looking into, because even if there's studies that are done on those topics outside of the province, things look a little bit differently when you're looking locally, right? So, it really depends on, as I showed with some of the slides that I had there with the different light recipes. You can actually change that composition, nutritional composition, from farm to farm, from vertical farm to vertical farm, just based on your light recipe. So that's something very important to remember as well, is the biochemistry of the plant can be controlled and fine-tuned just by changing the light spectra. And I'm harping on this that light piece so much today, just because a lot of the research that I'm involved in is towards understanding better the interaction between the light recipe and the plant. So that was a long way of saying, unfortunately, there is no direct answer to that question, but hopefully we'll get some of those answers in the near future.
But it actually helps. I had a few questions written down around sort of like that cost of production models that exist in, your more traditional agriculture type production. And this can be for either Michael or Patty. Do those exist within this sector, or just not at this point because there's not enough data or capacity?
Yeah, when I'm giving a presentation like this on the greenhouse sector, and you've seen these presentations before, Carolyn, there's a lot more data in terms of the cost of production in greenhouses, because it's been so established for a long period of time. We have the statistics, so I'm working closely within the provincial ministry, as well as with Stats Canada, to inform the people who get that information that we really need to start studying the vertical farming sector a little bit more closely, and getting some of those numbers on cost of production. So cost of production is available for the more established production systems, but vertical farms, I don't have those numbers, and maybe Derek can speak to a little bit about what he's experienced.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just you
I think that the question was around estimating, because it's a newer sector, you don't have some of the historical information or data or research that maybe exists in other sectors. So when you were doing your business planning and figuring out what did you use as a guide of what your cost of production would, or how much how much your gas or your heating cost would be versus in your growing and electricity, that sort of thing? Did you have to estimate that, or how did you go about establishing that?
The fortunate way that we stood up is that we worked with an equipment manufacturer that was able to actually, they have their own test farm and they have years of experience in this. So we were able to work with them and understand what their situation is and kind of extrapolate that into what our setup would be. I would say most people that start a vertical farm and want to do it in some short period of time are going to purchase equipment rather than develop it in-house. And if you're working with an equipment manufacturer who you are going to be purchasing from, definitely communicate with them. They will, if they don't have the information themselves, and they've sold farms to other people presumably, who you could definitely connect with, and hopefully those farms would be able to share some information with you regarding electricity usage, which is an important factor. You could definitely, if you spend the time, you could break that down, and how many lights you're buying, how much air conditioning you're going to have on your roof. You could definitely figure those things out, but there's definitely some nuances that other farms would be able to help you with and figure out a more precise measurement and specifications.
You know what, that does have a lot. I have a livestock background, and when you start in poultry, if you don't have a background, you work with your feed company to help you figure out some of that aspect. So there is some you can draw some analogies to other sectors as well. Mike, what do you see from is there information to support sort of that cost of production, that startup from the aquaponics perspective?
Unfortunately, right now, aquaponics is really limited. There are very few producers, so like that information is just something I don't have access to, based on the fact that there's not really enough people out there doing this sort of growing technique.
Great. And Derek, there's a question specifically about what type of, who the provider was for what specific company did you work with for your setup?
Yeah, so I think they're actually on the call right now. They are ZipGrow. They are one of the few Canadian equipment manufacturers of vertical farming equipment. So definitely kind of nice that they're in Canada, local, and easier to deal with that in that sense. And yeah, I would encourage people to reach out to them. I think it's zipgrow.com, and you can get some information there, or reach out to me if you want to learn a little bit about the equipment that way as well.
Great. And we had another question from Lighting Solutions, and they were asking, they're an Ontario made product, so if they wanted to present their products to the sector, how would they do that? And I get this question often as a economic development advisor. We're a lighting company, we're investing in this sort of thing. Where would they present or could make buyers aware of their products? I'll turn this over to any of you who would have, and not just lighting, I mean any producer of technology that supports the sector.
Yeah, so I'm, as I mentioned in the presentation, I'm a member of the organizing committee for the Canadian Greenhouse Conference. So that's a good place to go. It's an annual conference at the beginning of October. We have manufacturers, suppliers from really across the sector. Obviously, the majority of them are greenhouse, but there's a lot of crossover between greenhouse and vertical farming. As I mentioned, we did have previously last year a session specifically dedicated to vertical farmers, and that did bring some vertical farmers to the conference. It was virtual last year. Hopefully it'll be in person next year. So look that up. There's always opportunities for you to market your product through the CGC. We offer different marketing options, whether it's just like an email blast to our email list, or for you to be present at the conference. There's a trade show floor, and there's speaker rooms. So there's definitely opportunity for a lot of the suppliers to interact with people interested in the vertical farming sector through the Canadian Greenhouse Conference. Greenhouse Canada magazine as well. They're, as you know, Carolyn, they're covering this webinar series. Greenhouse Canada magazine is a great place to market as well, and it's a great resource for anybody who wants to learn more about controlled environment agriculture technologies in general. Again, lots of greenhouse specific stuff, but also vertical farming content is being included. So I would point people to those two main resources that I'm very familiar with and connected with. So, myself, if you want more information about CGC or the Greenhouse Canada magazine, let me know. I can connect you with the right folks. Otherwise, you can look them up online. But yeah, those are the two main ones that I'm aware of.
Amazing. Michael,
Derek,
any suggestions?
Sorry, I thought maybe Derek would let us know how he got in touch with Zipgrow.
Oh, good idea.
Yeah, Zipgrow, they have a pretty prominent YouTube channel, and I guess when I was in the early days of researching vertical farming, I came across them, and that's how I got connected with them. And they do produce or distribute their own lights. I would say it's difficult for a lighting manufacturer to come in and sell to a vertical farm that already is in existence, because that farm has already put a large investment into lights, and to change it out is quite costly. So Fadi's recommendation of the conferences and stuff like that would definitely be useful, and just online marketing as much as possible if that's possible.
Yeah, and as we have more of these kind of webinars targeted towards the vertical farming sector, there'll be opportunities for marketing, sponsorships, and those sorts of things. And one thing that I do want to comment on that Derek said, the replacement of lights. There has been, that I know of, some vertical farmers that have had some issues with their lights, and they've actually had to completely replace millions of dollars of worth of lights in a facility because they weren't getting the right spectrum, they weren't getting the right quantity. So there's still some issues in the sector in terms of getting the proper lights. So there's a lot of room for manufacturing better quality of lights specifically, and being able to demonstrate those types of advantages and benefits would really help the sector. So although Derek is right, it costs a lot of money to go on your own and buy lights, not through a supplier that already gives you a turnkey operation type of supplier, but there's definitely room for growth, specifically in the lighting, because of the spectrum in terms of, and I shouldn't say that word too many times, but the diversity in terms of the light quality, right, that's out there. So you have to be careful where the lights are coming from, because we've had some issues. I'm not going to name country names, but we've had some issues from overseas countries that are selling LEDs specifically that are not the quality that you need for a proper vertical farming production. So just to flag people's awareness of some of the issues that's happening with lights, and what I'm hearing from vertical farmers.
I would just add on to that, like lights, as Fadi is stressing, there is definitely, the most important aspect in terms of growing, and as he could see in his presentation. So definitely, do as much research as you can on your lighting, and stress that that's an important factor.
Yeah, sure. Is there any certification you look for the lighting to at all?
There is a certification body called Design Light Consortium, which you could use. They don't necessarily specify for vertical farming or anything, but they are recognized by Save On Energy in Ontario, as high quality lights, and they do, pass some sort of efficiency specifications. And by being certified with DLI and noticed by Save On Energy, you are able to get some money back from the government in the purchase of those lights.
And I would encourage anybody starting a vertical farm, or even present vertical farmers, to please test your lights. Make sure you have a light sensor, not only for light quantity, but get a sensor that will give you the spectral output. Because as I said, we've had experiences with vertical farmers testing their lights months after they get them, and not seeing the output that they were expecting.
Yeah, and in your presentation, the slide you had that showed the different types of lighting spectrums and what their growth looked like on the plants was really dramatic, right? It has a huge impact, it looks like. So Michael, we have a lot of questions for you. So I'm going to start firing some questions your way. The one is, aquaponics restricted to fish, or can you do shrimp or other aquatic life as well?
You can definitely do other aquatic life, shrimp being one of the main ones. It's eligible for culture in Ontario, so is the giant prawn. So those would be the two sort of non-fish aquatic species, but really doesn't have to be a fin fish, no.
Okay. And can you grow cold water fish in Ontario? I'm assuming they mean within an aquaponics system with that question.
So, I mean, some people try to grow, they do grow rainbow trout. So quick answer is yes. Cold water species can be grown in aquaponics. If you're using a dual loop system, it's perhaps a little more easy. You know, the upper threshold for rainbow trout is around 20 degrees. So at 20 degrees, rainbow trout really aren't that happy. They're very susceptible to disease and death. And that's sort of where your plants start to get comfortable. So you can use cold water species. Short answer, it can pose some problems with matching temperatures with your plants and your fish.
And there was a question you had talked about the microorganisms, the soil or the water. Are they introduced into the system, or are they naturally occurring?
They are naturally occurring. There are some things you can do to introduce them. There are actual products that you can purchase, nitrifying bacteria. You can also grind up fish feed and throw it into your biofilter. Or you could just wait over time. They naturally colonize. So, you know, a biofilter will take about 6 months to colonize, and just sit tight.
Another question specifically, do you need a license for invasive fish species?
Well, I mean, if a fish species is deemed invasive, the short answer is the fish species you culture must be on the eligible for culture list. So we're not going to put an invasive species on the eligible for culture list. So you're not going to be able to grow an invasive species. If it's on the list, you're free to culture it in Ontario.
Derek, we have some questions specifically for you. How much does your packaging and labeling cost? And they're wondering per container. Is that a calculation that you've done?
Yeah, labeling can vary quite well. They both can vary quite a bit based on different qualities of labels and packaging. Right now, we are around 60 cents per clamshell and about 10 cents per label, which I think is fairly achievable by most growers in pretty much any location in Ontario, at least.
Great. And I think the second part of that question you addressed during your presentation. There's a question around sort of other crops. Can any of these systems be used to grow beans or lentils, was the question. I'm not sure who wants to field that one.
I mean, anything's possible. It's just the viability.
Is it profitable though, right?
Most likely not.
If you're talking about water lentils in aquaponics, or like dogweed, or no, sorry. Water lentils, yes, within aquaponics.
Good to know. It's hard to know when it's a question typed in a chat what the context is, so we're trying to pull from there. Derek, there's another question for you. As a new grower, what's been your biggest challenge in the past year, and what do you see the biggest challenge going forward?
I mean, as a new grower, there's a lot of things to juggle. So I would say to stress, definitely collecting your data, testing out different crops, different environmental conditions for those crops, and figuring out what is going to do best. You know, starting up, you're not really sure where to focus. And I wouldn't say I focused as much as I should have on that at the beginning, which led to, I guess, some longer periods of non-optimal growth. So right from the get-go, even, you know, before you actually start a farm, if you're able to get some sort of in-house growing setup that's similar, where you can start testing that kind of stuff out and get used to, you know, the system at a smaller scale or the crops that you want to grow, then that would be ideal.
There's all sorts of more questions coming in. If any of the speakers want to contribute to those in the chat, that'd be helpful. There's a question around, and it was Fatty, it was when you were talking, is why such a short production cycle? Wouldn't it help with something that needs a longer growing cycle? We want to grow something that has a 9-month cycle. So it's just around sort of that timing for the production.
So why such a short cycle? That's a good question. So a number of factors. One being space. So a lot of these vertical farms are you know, they don't have a lot of space, so they want to be able to keep the plant small and compact and really you know, concentrate as many plants in a space as possible to get the most production out of that space. In order to do that, you need to have, you know, a short turnaround cycle. Also, the technology, the production technology, the production knowledge for these production systems traditionally has been with these short crops like lettuces, leafy greens, and all of those are short kind of production, as Derek said, you know, a few weeks up to a couple of months. And you basically have to, you clean out your system after that. Some of the issues with a longer production cycle is the ability to keep the system clean becomes more difficult the longer you keep a plant in your room, right, in the vertical farm. So that's an issue. Also with these, the longer you're growing a plant, the bigger it gets. Which means you're requiring more light and more space. You're not able to, especially the vertical space, you're not able to really stack plants vertically as much as you can. So there's a number of issues with that. So what I've seen in the sector now is the move towards, as I mentioned, like mini vegetables, so mini tomatoes, mini cucumbers, mini peppers being grown in these systems to allow for a longer production cycle, but you keep the plants small, right? So as long as you pick the right variety that can grow in a small space, then you're producing, you're increasing your production efficiency. And yeah, so those are the main points for why we're picking small crops right now.
That's helpful. There's a question that just came up in the chat, and I think we can do one final question before we wrap up. Are there significant differences in food processing sanitary procedures, so I'm thinking food safety procedures, between aquaponics and hydroponics crop processing? Michael, or?
I mean, it's going to be hard for me to speak to the processing of hydroponics. I mean, I would say with aquaponics in general, I think it's the best case scenario if you can separate your fish and your plant production. So they're in 2 separate buildings or 2 separate rooms, so that there's not any sort of transfer, you know, of disease or any sanitary issues transferred between your plant production and your fish production. Obviously, with aquaculture, you want to do things like foot baths and hand sanitizers and change your boots when you're going into the, you know, the fish production side of things. So those are sort of the sanitary approaches you want to take. In terms of like processing the crops themselves, I just don't know if there's any differences between hydroponic production and aquaponic.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Mike said about keeping different stages of the production cycle separate. One thing that I've seen in vertical farms that I get a little uneasy when I do enter a farm and I see just a big room with all the different stages in it and not physical separation between your germination room, your production room, your processing room. Some vertical farms are doing a great job of keeping things clean and they're able to do it, but it becomes a lot easier if you're actually physically separating those those stages. Not always possible, as I'm sure Derek can attest to. It depends on the layout of your building, and all those sorts of things have to come into play. But ideally, that would be the ideal system, is to really separate the different stages of your crop production as much as possible.
Well, thank you. I think we could keep going for quite some time with the other questions we had, but unfortunately we are out of time. For those who are on the call, there is a 3 dots on top of the your chat box. If you press that, you can save the chat. So you save all the links and the information that was saved onto your computer. So you've got that immediately before the information is shared. So this brings us to the end of week 1 of our 4-week series of webinars. I want to thank each of you as our speakers. You brought so much expertise to the table. We really appreciate your time and your expertise and answering the questions. I think it's a great foundation of information building for the 3 weeks to come. I'd like to remind everyone that webinar 2 takes place next Thursday on February 10th, same time, same link. And this module 2 will focus on the applications of vertical farming, and we'll have Boreal Greens will be our business that will be speaking, as well as Seneca College and the Kingsbridge Innovation Hub. And we have the moderator is joining us from Helix Seneca College. So if you haven't been able to join this one, but you're watching the webinar, please join before next time. So thank you. Take care, and we'll see you all again next week. Bye-bye.
Good day.